Hello. Hello.
Hi, Dr. Schwarzbaum. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Good. So I'm going to start instead of waiting for other people to join because like we usually do, I'm recording. So for those of you who cannot attend live and who may want to watch this, I want to welcome you to the Zoom call for Module 4 and give you some dates for the next one. The Module 5 will be released on January 15th. The Module 5 Zoom call will be on February 5th at 11 a.m. And the office hour will be on February 10th at 6 p.m. So as a reminder, the Zoom calls are 90 minutes and are recorded. The office hours are not recorded, and it's whoever wants to show up. I generally don't need you to tell me if you're going to come on the call or not. Some people have been reaching out and telling me I can come or I cannot come, and that's, you know, it doesn't matter because I'm recording them. Of course, the more people there are, the more questions you might have. I'm always prepared to say some things in case there are not too many people, but this module had coincidentally the lesson, the first lesson was on theory integration and the second lesson was on the developmental model, and coincidentally the session with the couple showed the use of the dialogue tool that I think you had heard already, but this was a little more maybe a little more advanced than the first one you heard, and the tool is in the toolbox. The dialogue tool is in the toolbox of the site. The other thing I wanted to say in general is that on the PDFs, I always put out the resources. So for example, on the developmental model, on the PDF, not on the lesson, maybe I should do it on lessons too, but it's not there. It's the training site of the Couples Institute. So Ellen Bader and Pete Pearson, who are the founders of the Couples Institute in California, are the ones who developed the developmental model. And so I use a lot of the tools based on their trainings and their teachings. They are amazing mentors and teachers. And I recommend, you know, I'm just going to be, I mentioned the training sites for getting more training on the particular framework I am discussing on the PDFs. That's the main thing I wanted to let you know. And maybe books and websites and other resources, depending on what I find or what I want to share with you. Okay, that's about it for me. What I'd like to do is ask you, as I always do, for some questions, whether it's about the module, about the lessons. There were two in this module, or the session. And I'm gonna get, write down your questions and then figure out how I can answer them. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So welcome to those who are here, and also welcome to those who are listening. And I would start with the questions. Oh, I wanted to apologize for the time change. I'm in Florida right now, so I needed to do the time change for today, unfortunately, because I'm actually doing, it's not because of but because of the fact that I'm in Florida, it's because I am doing a presentation to the California Association for Marriage and Family Therapists at 11 o'clock. So I couldn't do 11 o'clock this morning. That's why it is. So I apologize for the change.
I'm in Florida too, so so it kind of worked out for me.
Yeah, good. So, okay, so I'll take your questions or comments if you have any.
I have a question, a comment and a question. Comment was, I thought this couple was a great example of being stuck in the stage of differentiation. And when I guess the stages of development in a relationship are kind of parallel or derivative of the stages of development for individuals, Erik Erikson's stages. And he also claims that if you don't resolve one stage, you can't move on to the next stage, which I'm not sure in the individual development, but I thought it was very clear in this couple that they're so stuck there they can't move on to exploration, except there were moments of that which I assume came from your work with them, but clearly differentiating each other is just so difficult for them. So and I was actually, have to say, I was sort of shocked that they're in their 60s and they haven't gotten past that stage. So, yeah. So I don't know if you want to say some more about that. And my question was about the initiator listener technique, which I often use, but there's a sort of subtle point, which is one is not supposed to blame or accuse the other when one is talking, but I often find a construction like, when you say this, I feel this. So I sometimes feel like maybe that's accusatory or blaming, and I often will jump in and try to rephrase, put it more objectively, like, for example, you know, if these kinds of words make me feel this kind of way, something like that. But I'm wondering if I'm being kind of too picky about this, that I don't have to worry so much about this. And I don't always kind of jump in and rephrase, but maybe it's sometimes the tone of it that bothers me, or just getting a feeling from the listener how they are reacting to it. But I wanted your thoughts on that, whether you would jump in and rephrase, or sometimes not. Yeah.
In the past, I have accumulated all the questions and then I answer. Should I do that today too, or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Sharon. Who wants to go next?
I'll go. I think I have a lot of thoughts about it. I don't know if I actually have a question, but some things that I've been thinking about is, I really appreciated in the lessons that you're talking, and especially listening to the session, you're talking about Bill Pensov and Art Nielsen, and the ways of using different models, and the ways of integrating and figuring out how and when to use them, and the idea of, you know, whether you beginning with looking at future and present and then going to the past, like that's really helpful for me as a way of organizing what I do, especially because you know, one of the things that I learned in my training, and that I have used some, is to start with a genogram, which is definitely the past. But I find myself sometimes when I start with that feeling like, well, this doesn't feel like the meat of what we need to be talking about yet. And so that helps me feel like, oh yeah, this is why, this makes sense. And why I feel like sometimes I skip the Genogram in the very beginning, and I have this feeling like, well, I should be doing the Genogram, but it's not what I naturally want to do. And so that was just helpful affirmation of, oh yeah, this is why this makes sense. But something that I was thinking about when I was listening to the session, it felt like that would have been a really hard session for me, especially like when you were asking them what makes you feel close to the other one or connected. And he, of course, had like a list, a bullet point of 5 or 6 things. And then she was like, when I'm not angry. And just, you really had to keep like asking her again and asking her again. And she didn't seem like she was really even happy about having to talk about it again and again. But then like 5 minutes later or something, in a different conversation, she finally said, I feel really connected when he cooks for me. Like, it's like she finally came up with it on her own. But I just thought, well, that's so interesting. And then he was like, well, I don't feel like that's great at all. And it really highlighted the love language thing, because he was like, well, it's like, I'm only as good as the thing I do then. Like, and I was finding myself getting lost in that, like, oh my gosh, like as a therapist, I'm not sure that I would know how to keep going with these people because it felt so at odds. So I don't know that I really have a straight up question, just sort of an observation that it felt hard to me. Like, it felt like it would have been really hard. And I appreciated getting to listen to it.
Okay. I do feel like I want to jump in a little before I keep going with the questions, because I want to take Sharon's comment and your comment, Monica, and just say a few things about that. So Sharon, you were saying this is a perfect example, and they're in their 60s. And that is true. I couldn't agree more. That is a very good example of the entrenched symbiotic dynamic that so many couples have. And this couple has been doing it for decades. And in my intro to the session, I didn't even say, because of confidentiality issues, I didn't even say the extent of the damage that they have done to each other. I didn't want to make the comments about specifically the damage, but you can imagine what a passive aggressive male worried about his wife's anger could do to try to solve the problem. So whatever you're imagining is probably true. So, you know, so I'm gonna make a general comment about that, conflict avoidant. So most divorces are initiated by women, and at least in my practice, I don't know if this is true in general, but in my practice, most affairs are initiated by conflict avoidant men. And so this is one way that they solve the problems that some couples like this one present. So yeah, this couple is a perfect example, but it's also a perfect example, as I said in my intro to the audio, of the amount of work, of the nice work you can do with a couple that has been married for decades. Now, this session is about 6 or 7 months into the treatment. They have now been in treatment for about a year. Well, no, about maybe less than that. But anyway, I think they're a lot better, a lot better. And they've gotten even better since then.
Yeah, he made some comments actually about her newfound independence from him.
Right. And the fact that she was less angry was huge. And I mean, I understood why it was. She couldn't even think about the connection.
Mm-hmm.
But but also I think that this is her problem, that she can't, her anger was blinding her so much that she couldn't even think of what she wanted. And so part of the next stage of the process was to make space for her. You know, I think that a big part of her, I can tell you a big part of her development, individual development, speaking about development, is that she is now able to say, we're having 6 people for dinner 3 days from now. This is what I need for you to do to help me, because I don't want to be doing it all. Whereas in the past, she would not have said that. She would have gotten to the day of the dinner party and she would have been blasting him for not doing something that she expected him to do, because that's what we always do when we have people over for dinner. Right. So she couldn't even express her own. So I am not surprised that she couldn't say what what makes her feel connected, because she's not, that's part of what differentiation does. When you do that work, you help them to focus on self-revelation, self-revealing, right? So I want to move on to Monica's comment about the stages, that it makes sense to start that it validated why you don't do the genogram. That's great. Right. I would say I hope I put in the stages that I think it's important to start with the future. Right? To where do you want to go? What kind of relationship do you want to have? What kind of partner do you want to be? You know, and then we look at the barriers to get there. And once you understand the barriers, in order to understand the barriers, that's when you need to do the genogram. But I think when I start talking about the past, and it's not that I never do in the very beginning. I might say something like, well, I can't think of it right now, but I'm just saying that I might refer to it. This may be an old feeling. This may be an old, this may not be something generated just by your partner. It could be something that was generated when you were growing up. I mean, I may speculate that, but I don't actually do that work. But that's not always true either. So I'm working with a couple right now that has a lot of trauma, and they got into a lot of trouble very early on, like within 4 to 6 months of their relationship. This is a same-sex couple, and I had to go back. They're young. They're both very young. They have a lot of trauma, and I did it almost from the beginning. I saw them together for 2 or 3 times, and then I immediately started the individual sessions because I needed to understand what I say in one of the lessons. I needed to understand the symptom maintenance structure. What's going on here? What else is going on here? And so I started right away with some very quick speculative hypotheses about the ways in which they were acting with each other and structuring their dynamic. So, you know, and with the couple that you heard, the one that you just heard, I don't think I ever went there. I think that I had one session with each of them to understand a bit, in part because they're older, and the older the couple is, the harder it is to go there. But you know, I think in one session, I know that she had a very, I know she had a very strict father, and a father who had very high expectations of her. So she's very unforgiving of herself, and that spills out in how she is unforgiving with him. So for example, that's one thing we were able to work on. That some of her criticism of him is rooted in her own you know, self-imposed criticism of herself. She doesn't forgive herself for her own mistakes, and that comes from having had parental very high expectations, and she has to be perfect and all of that. So I did go there a little bit, but not a whole lot actually with this couple. And moving on to your other comment about this would have been a hard session, and that I kept asking. So I guess I'm going to throw it back at you guys and ask you, so what did you learn about this? What did you learn from this session about how to do this work?
I think I had the same comment as Monica related to that piece, because I had to listen to it a couple times because I felt she was giving the answer, but I think she also interpreted that it wasn't enough. So I think she got a little defensive. So, but I think also you were trying to say, okay, but tell me what that looks like when you're not as angry. And that's what she had trouble really sharing until a little bit later. But I think that's where I would probably feel less confident, or that the person would probably be upset at me and kind of like shut down. So I think that's probably my worry with a situation like that.
Okay. Anybody else wants to comment on that? Because I want to say, so this is a very important piece of the of what you're experiencing.
I would say something that I was thinking about that I think I've learned from it is that I think that whenever in a session when I'm asking a question like that, especially since the husband was the example of, okay, I think this, and this, and then the wife's answer was so different that with her answering and then you sort of rephrasing and asking in a different way and trying, it was almost like this realization that it wasn't just about getting to the answer, but about like this whole process of how do you think about it, and then how do you talk about it, and then how do you, like, just getting her to have to be in the loop of thinking about that and trying to think of it in different ways, and the conversation around it was the important part of her finally getting to the answer on her own even. But
well, you're at a disadvantage because I know where I want to take her. I know that I need to take her to a place where she can do this for a number of reasons, but for, you know, a little bit of what I said earlier, because she's not good at this, because she's more focused on him or less focused on, you know, herself. So I knew where I wanted to take her. So you're at a disadvantage because you don't know that.
Right.
So, but this is a good example of, you need to know where you want to take them. And when you know where you want to take them, you can do it better if you have a strong alliance. So that's a second point I want to make. I have a very strong alliance with them. They both trust me. They both believe I can help them. And I talk a bit about that in my lesson. And I don't know if you heard me. I think I did. Though I didn't listen to that part again, but I think I did ask permission. So when I do something that I know is going to be hard for the client, but I know it's also good for them. When I know it's good, but I know it's going to be hard, I tell them, this is going to make you uncomfortable. This is not going to be easy. Do I have your permission to insist? Are you in a place where you can hear me? Do you think I can go ahead and do this? So I don't do it without the without communicating about what I want to communicate. So right. So you were saying you might feel less confident, Ruby, and you were saying, Monica, this would be hard to keep asking So yeah, she might get mad at you, which is, then you would process that and say, then you would process that. It's hard for you to say what you want. It's hard for you to articulate what you prefer. You're not used to doing that. And then I would be empathic and say, it's okay to want what you want. Take a minute and think about it, right? So I would do different things with different people, but it depends on my alliance. I would completely back off if I thought that my alliance wasn't strong enough or I couldn't soften it. You know, the last part of the session is the same, right? So I think this is a session where I'm putting some emphasis. Anyway, let me finish my thought. So at the end, I was doing also some work on differentiation when her reaction to his plan was to feel dismissive. And I mean, that's an interesting choice that I made to go where I went. Not everybody would have done that. So I want to hear your comments about that too. So I said, I sort of, I didn't focus on her feelings of feeling dismissed. I went with, he didn't make a dismissing request. He talked about himself. But another therapist might have gone, you know, down the road to talking about her feeling dismissed. And I didn't do that because I think I know where I want to take her.
Mhm.
I know that she needs to be able to develop the ability to tolerate his wishes without going crazy.
I thought that was a really great intervention, actually, and precisely because of getting her to differentiate and sort of digging behind where the heck is that anger coming from when all he's doing is saying, this is what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking about. So I just had a session with a couple of week or so ago where it was also sort of the same in picking up on a very unusual reaction to something her partner was saying, and sort of digging behind that. So I felt that this was kind of similar, although you had definitely, this couple doesn't have a problem with, the couple I'm working with doesn't have a problem with differentiation. It was more her past trauma history. But again, the sort of key to me was, this is an unusual reaction, and that's how I felt with your couple, that she was angry when he was making a simple statement.
Right. So that's why it's so important to keep in mind what you as a therapist think.
Mm-hmm.
What you think, where you want to take them.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is a good step for their development?
Yeah.
And I want to, okay, so any other comments, or should I keep asking you to list some questions, because we still have a couple of questions on the table. Do you have any more questions about the session or the lesson?
Well, I would just say that I'm really intrigued with the developmental model. And when I listened to it and when I read your handout, like it, you know, I wanted to go look at the website for the Baders and their thing. Like I'm interested in it because it makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I've heard of it. I mean, I've heard you talk about it before, but I think it just makes so much sense for so many of the things that the couples that I see are dealing with.
Yeah. As you'll see, it's the first lens through which I look at a couple and diagnose a couple, and then in the next module, I think I talk about the systemic model. So
Mhm.
in the solution focused approach. So you'll see my other ways of thinking, but this is one of the fundamental lens through which I look at couples. Okay, Todd, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I just had a lot of stuff people have already said. When you were talking about how I might have gone with the feelings when she was talking, and then, but the way you did, I think, what worked out better. So that's what I sometimes get caught up in that, I think. And so it's like finding different ways, I find myself wanting to keep understanding and understanding and understanding. And I like the way you keep it moving forward as well. And I think sometimes I get bogged down kind of, if that makes any sense. So I just appreciated that, because like you keep it moving, but up, which is nice.
Yeah, thank you for that comment
Yeah.
too, because I do think that captures exactly my feeling and about pushing them forward. What would make them better?
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly how I operate. And I get into trouble sometimes. It doesn't always work out, and coupled with that, I want to say something about understanding and going with a feeling, because, that's the art of therapy, to try to figure out when to do that. When do you need to become empathic and understanding? And, I do a form of initiator inquirer with my own clients. So I can be the listener, right? This is what we do. We are the listeners, and we ask questions to try to understand. So what you're saying is a big part of our job. It's not that it isn't. It's just to try to find the balance between when do you do that? When do you do your own listening and understanding and empathizing? And when do you keep moving them forward? And I think that another thing I want to say about that is that this is very difficult work in part. So, right, we always say this is very tough. This is very difficult work, but in part it's because of that balance between listening and understanding and helping them move forward. And the other reason it's hard is because you're trying to determine, are you interested in looking at their interpersonal, or are you interested in looking at their intrapsychic? And so I chose the interpersonal in that moment, where I chose to focus on the effect of what he was doing on her, rather than on her reaction, and going deeper into understanding her reaction and where it came from and why she felt dismissed. I bet you that she felt dismissed by her father. There's no doubt in my mind. But that's the moment where you need to figure out, should I go there, or should I go, to understand the effect he has on her, and how she's not 10 years old anymore. She's not 20. Anyway, whatever. So I chose that other route, but you could choose you just have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And just because you choose one route doesn't mean you can't choose another route the next time, right? So,
So, Sarah, what drove you was where you knew where you wanted to take this couple at that moment. For me, I guess the prompt for me was different, in just that her reaction was so unusual that it made me think, wait, where is this coming from? And wanting to pursue how that, how should I say, how that was affecting their interaction. Right? It's almost like I'm looking for a clue to figure out whether to go with digging more into the feelings or going into pushing the relationship forward. But
Yeah,
I'm
that's the dilemma that we all have to choose. That's
Yeah.
the dilemma, and I don't always know where I want to take him.
mm,
But when I do, I try to, and if it doesn't work, I back off
mhm, mhm.
and go a different direction. So this one worked
Yeah.
because she said that's a good point. If she hadn't said that, I don't know what I would have done. She could have not said that.
Mhm,
I would have backed off.
mhm.
And I would have gone to understanding her feeling dismissed a little more, maybe.
Mhm.
So I want to go back to the point that you were making, Sharon, about using the dialogue tool for in intervening when you feel like they're blaming and accusing. Again, I'm with you. I very much try for them not to feel accused or blamed. But it's a very interesting fine line. So I think in undifferentiated couples, the mere expression of the wishes of the partner is seen as wishes or concerns. Let's go with concerns. This is not like in this case. So, the mere expression of a concern can be understood as a criticism, and we're all familiar with that. So when let me take the typical example of the overloaded mother working full time that also has 2 children and feels like she does more of the work. When she starts saying to him who does less, or she feels like he does less, or he does do less, for a number of reasons, and she starts saying, I need this, I need that, the mere expression of the need is seen by him as a criticism. So so we do have to, and this is why I do a lot of education of the listener.
Mhm.
I prepare them for using the tool. I go over I don't think I ever tell people we have this tool, you're going to be the initiator, you're going to be the listener, and then not go over it. I go over it very, very specifically. So when you're the listener, so I separate the roles of the listener and the initiator. And I say to them, a lot of couples get in trouble because it's hard to know who's talking about what and what we're talking about. So in here, we're going to try to differentiate who's talking, who's initiating, and what needs to happen when one is initiating. And I know from being a therapist and from being in a couple relationship, I know that what I need from when I initiate is for someone to tell me, so what you're saying is this, and what you want is that. And instead of saying something else, which is what happens all the time. Whenever one initiates, what you get is that the other one either feels attacks and counterattacks, or feels like his issue is not being addressed. Well, it's not, because it's her issue we're addressing, not your issue. Anyway, so you see where I'm going with this. So I do I explain this. I tell them what they do, or I ask them what they do. Do you do it this way? Do you do it that way? this, or I see it and I show it to them. And then I say, we want to do something a little different. And, and I explain it and educate them on the role of the initiator and the role of the listener and how different they are and how they need to be taking turns. And you heard me coach her with that when I said, well, what questions do you want? If I were in your shoes, I would want to know what's on his mind. I don't think you know what's on his mind. But just let me do a caveat of the question. The questions of the listener are designed to not only increase the understanding of the listener about the partner, but it's designed to help the partner go deeper, the one who's initiating going deeper. So it's a tool not just for the listener, it's a tool for the initiator. To go deeper, to get to know themselves better, to self-reveal more, to be more vulnerable. I mean, it's designed for that. It's not just designed for the listener to do a better job at listening. So that was the caveat. I wanted to go back to the question about, so yeah, part of the education and preparation of the use of the tool is to be able to help the initiator not to make an accusatory term. But if you as a therapist have had in your own life, this is what I wanted to say. So this part of this is about countertransference. In your own life, if you've been accused, in your own life, if you've been criticized, or you've seen somebody being criticized, even if you were not the recipient, but if you have a history of undifferentiated family of origin, you will have a harder time with this.
So I can see where, and I think even some of your previous audios have shown like, where the partner becomes defensive because it felt accusatory or whatever. But I think sometimes the construction of it's more like to give context. The speaker will say things like, when you say this, I feel this. And it's not meant to be accusatory. It's meant to just give the context of when the speaker starts to feel that way. But I always worry that, and that sometimes I feel like that context is needed because you have to locate the source of problem. But again, I'm a little bit maybe too picky about thinking the listener will feel accused. It's like, oh, I said this, so you're picking at my saying this.
Right.
But real context, it's more really to give the context on which they felt that.
Well, yes and no. So, okay.
So I can give you an example. Recent working with this client. The husband had said, or the partner had said something like, he was relaxing, he has some days off work, his partner is all stressed out, and he was doing something, he was taking a bath or doing aromatherapy or something, and then he says to his partner, you could really use this. So she initiated about that. And, she spoke up and said, well, when you say things like, when you say that, I feel like you're accusing me, like there's something wrong with me. But for her, it was just in order to say where the problem occurred. It's just the context. I don't know, would you interpret that as being blaming, accusatory? I can kind of see where he might feel that way, but maybe not.
Right. So
I think I might be being too particular about.
So
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to think about how your question, and so you are picking up on his so it could be that you're sensitive to that kind of issue, right? To criticism. It could be that, but it could also be that you're picking up on his sensitivity and you're protecting him from her initiation. So if you think that that's the issue and you think he needs to get better at that, and many men do need to get better at that, then you need to help him calm down. You need to help him listen better. You need to help him understand her. And so again, like I said, you need to know where you want to take him.
Yeah.
If you stay with the protection, you may not do him any favors, right? If you stay with the protection of him from her, rather than on his development, you know, does he need to be able to tolerate her expression of why she doesn't like it when he says that? Because another way of interpreting what he says is that that's a passive aggressive way. I mean, you know, that's a passive aggressive way for him to say, you know, she's right. You know, like, you could, you know, he could say it differently. He could say, you know, I know you're very stressed out and I'm trying to relax. Would you like to relax too? I mean, he could do it in a little more relational way too.
Yeah.
So, so that he, you know, but the first thing is he needs to understand what about that comment made her feel, you know, criticized. So what I do when I prepare a listener and I know that they're going to have a hard time, I pay particular attention to the role of the listener, and I tell them, you're going to have reactions to what she's saying. I tell him you're not going to be able to tolerate some of what she says. You're going to be thinking about what you want to say in return. You're going to be worried about, you're not going to be able to listen well. Those are all barriers to listening. So listening is a very difficult thing to do because it requires you to really listen to what your partner is saying. You may not even agree. You may disagree with what she's saying, but the point of the listener is to understand it. You don't have to agree. You don't have to, but you do, you know, you do want to listen, even if you disagree. And so after I explain this, I tell them you're going to have a reaction. And I tell them 3 behaviors. You're going to want to respond to her with what you want, with, you know, with your disagreement. You're going to want to argue it back. You're going to want to, what did I say? Whatever, you know, whatever you see him do, you're going to want to say things about yourself. And all of those are barriers to listening to her. So I, you know, this is not the initiator listener protocol is not something that we do once and that's it. They, you know, most people find it incredibly useful.
Yeah.
And the last thing I want to say about what I do to prepare them, and I say, that is all normal for you to want to argue back or disagree or think this way. You know, I don't do it to criticize them. I tell them that's normal. That's what most people do, but it just prevents you from listening well. And so if you want, I can help you. Do you need me to help you to listen better? One thing you could do, and I literally have them do that, I have them divide the page, I give them something to write with. I have them divide the page into two with a vertical line. And I have them write on the left side verbatim what the partner A is saying, verbatim. And on the right side of the column, I ask them to write down what they want to say, or their reactions, or their disagreements, or their disappointments, or whatever it is. So I have them divide the page, and on the left side, I do verbatim. And in the beginning, when the more trouble people have with this, with listening, the more they feel like this is a fake process.
Mhm. Mm.
Fake or forced or not natural.
Yeah.
And it's true, it's fake and forced and not natural because, but whatever same old you were doing wasn't working. Are you ready to try something else? And so when they can finally do that, even if it's mechanical, in the beginning it will be mechanical. So what you are saying is, and they look at their notes and they tell you what they're saying, and it feels for completely mechanical.
Mhm.
But the other one says, this is the first time he's saying that he gets what I'm saying. I mean, is there the first time I feel heard?
Mhm.
It's amazing. So one feels it fake and the other one feels, or they both feel it's fake, and that's all right. So that's for the listener. Now the preparation of the initiator is important too. And I am very strict with that. I don't disagree with you, Sharon, that it's important but to make sure that they don't use blaming and criticism. But to say, when you do this, I feel this way, that is the formula. I don't know any other formula, because you need the context. You need to understand it that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right, so that is the formula. But my preparation of the initiator, I want to talk a little bit about that, is very important too. So Gottman says that the 80% of complaints are initiated by women, and that they initiated with a harsh startup, and that the way conversation will go is highly dependent on the beginning
Mhm.
of the initiator and how they initiate. So it's good if they're soft. It's good if they can
Yeah.
start with an appreciation. It's good if they can do something that precedes the actual complaint or the actual concern. And so that's part of the preparation. And the other part of the preparation of the initiator is to work on thinking. So thinking and preparing. What do you want to say, and what is the outcome that you expect? So many people have what we all know as unbridled self-expression, particularly many women. They think, he's my partner, I ought to be able to tell him how I feel, this is how I feel, I need to, but when they say that and they do that, they don't do it well. They don't know where they want to go. They don't know why they're saying what they're saying. They just want to spill it out. Well, that's a non-differentiated way of talking.
Mm.
So a big part of the preparation of the initiator is to prepare them. And so I don't let them go for it. I first talk to them and I say, what do you want to tell him? Why do you want to tell him this?
Mm.
What are you expecting the outcome will be? How can you say this to him in a way that will make him feel cared for and not, I think I said that to my client in this session. How can you initiate in a way, how do you want her to feel after the conversation? Which is a Pete Pearson phrase.
Oh, Pete Pearson.
Pete Pearson is the founder of the Couples Institute.
Ah, okay. The one in California.
Yeah, so he says to the initiator, how do you want her to feel at the end of the conversation? So first you get him to say that. I want him to feel respected. I want him to feel like I love him. I want him to feel like, okay, so with that frame of mind, then you can get him to initiate. So,
Mhm.
I mean, if you take all those caveats, the initiation will be better.
Yeah.
And it will be, and I also say, as part of the initiator, if I don't always have to do all this kind of education, but I'm giving you the worst case scenarios, right?
Mhm, mhm.
And so in the worst case scenarios, I tell them, especially women, especially women with that position, the unbridled self-expression. Some of them are conflict avoidance too, and they don't need that kind of, they need the different kind of education and preparation. If you want, I'll talk about the preparation of the conflict avoidant, but the one who has the unbridled self-expression and says, I have to tell him how I feel, and this is how I feel, and he has to know how I feel, I say, tell me 3 sentences. So I tell him that she has a role to play in whether she's heard or not.
Ah, mhm.
This is a major aspect of the work. You have a role to play in being heard. If you want him to hear you, and you want to be listened to, and you want him to respond better, you have to A, prepare him, meaning you can't just come at him anytime you feel like it, when you feel it. Just because you feel bad doesn't mean you ought to spill it out. You got to organize your thoughts. You got to figure out how you want to say, what you want to say, and when you want to say it. So that's the kind of work I do to prepare the initiator.
Mhm.
Um, and again, I don't always do all these things.
Yeah.
But often I do. And the more undifferentiated they are, the more, the more unorganized they are. I mean, we all have experiences with these people who, bring in the kitchen sink.
Mhm.
They want to say this, and they want to say that, and they want to say that, and they want to say that, and what happened 5 years ago? And well, no, that's not going to work. What do you want to say? Why do you want to say it? How do you want him to feel when you say it? And what's your purpose? And what do you want? So a piece of the initiation that is not in, I don't know if it's in the form or not. I hope it is, because I don't know if it's in the Couples Institute form, but a big piece of the initiator is the request. So at the end, sometimes initiations are just initiations for the sake of initiating and being listened to and heard. But often they are about requests. Like, for example, but okay. I don't, if you want me to give you an example, I'll think of an example, but when I get somebody to give a request,
So it might be something like asking the partner to be more helpful around the house or something.
yeah, exactly. So, but it's a very simple request, and then you have to educate the initiator that the partner may say, yes, I can do that, or may say, no, I can't do that. Let me initiate myself, or may say, let me think about that. So I coach the listener. I coach the initiator to make the request, and I coach the listener that they have 3 options. One of the reasons the initiator doesn't make requests is because they don't want to risk the answer of no. I mean, they don't want to risk the disappointment.
Mhm.
So, right. For example, I mean, this couple, I may have coached him to say, and so when she screams at you a half an hour before the dinner guests come, um, what would you wish she would do instead? So he might say, I wish she told me 3 days in advance what she needs from me on that day, or a day in advance what she needs from me on that day, because that way I can plan for it and I know what I want to help her. She's in charge of the kitchen, and that's fine. I just want to help her. I don't mind helping her. I just need to know in advance so I can plan my day. She can't spring on me that morning that at 11 o'clock I have to go get the bakery because I have planned a bike ride that, so she can't just spring it on me. So I would like to know in advance, half a day in advance, a whole day in advance, 2 days in advance, what she's going to need me to do on the day of the dinner party. That's a very legitimate request. And so you coach him to make it.
Mhm.
So I wanted to talk a bit more about I didn't think I would do that, but I realized that I do a lot of preparation of the initiator and the listener.
Yeah.
And so I decided to tell you about that after prompted by your question.
You said you could talk a little bit about preparation of a conflict avoidant speaker.
Right. So, right, the conflict avoidant preparation is very, very different. And you know, for the ones who get into fights and are undifferentiated and nobody knows who we're talking about and what we're talking about, and you know, all of those are what I'm doing is putting the brakes, making it smaller, making it lower, making it right. And with the conflict avoidant is the opposite. Right? It's the opposite. You need to get them to be able to do it because they don't do it. They hide it from themselves and their partners. They ignore their own concerns. They tend not, these are the couples who come in and say, we are best friends, but we haven't had sex in 5 years. We are a great parenting team. Whatever, you know, so these are the severely conflict avoidant couples, or they used to be very conflict oriented, but in the last few years, because it never worked, they've stopped doing it. So now they look like conflict avoidant, but they weren't conflict avoidant to begin with. It's just that it didn't work. So now they are, you know, the relationship has lost vitality and energy. And they only used to initiate in the midst of a problem, as opposed to, you know, having regular checkups with each other on what's working, what's not working. I need more of this, I need less of that. So when couples don't do that and they don't have the state of the relationship meeting, which is another concept I introduced, which I'm going to talk about in another module. It's the basic couple maintenance. I think I have it as another toolbox, as another tool in the toolbox, but in upcoming lessons. Anyway, so I don't know why they're avoiding it, right? So that's part of the assessment process. Are they avoiding it because they're conflict avoiders, or did they become conflict avoiders because when they did try to deal with it, it never worked? I'm going to go with the preparation of the conflict avoider to begin with. I mean, because that's a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit easier for me to tell you about it now. So for this, I'm thinking of a couple where both are avoiders, terribly so, and where self-revelation, honesty is very, very difficult. Their focus is on not hurting their partners, on not saying anything that's uncomfortable. Discomfort makes them very uncomfortable. You know, it makes them very anxious to bring something up that they think is going to affect their partner. They are the ones that they think a little bit like what you, Sharon, were saying. If I say this, they're going to feel criticized. Therefore, I'm not going to say it, and I'm going to swallow it because they're going to feel criticized by my request. You know, and these are sometimes people with histories of not having been able to voice their concerns and their wishes when they were growing up. Very, very often, it's you know, it coincides with that. So so this is a couple where one question I asked them early on is, okay, just one or two more examples. They come to sessions and they say, no, I don't know what I want to talk about. No, I didn't think about anything. Sorry. I'll take your lead. You know, you're the expert. Kind of thing. They're terribly annoying. They'll say, they'll talk about surface things like, you know, how you know, how their week went and that they didn't feel good that day and whatever. So they'll do anything to avoid it. And so to them, I asked at one point, okay, so again, I know where I want to take them. I know where they need to go. So, you know, how am I going to push them? If I push too hard, they're going to quit. And if I don't push enough, they're not going to make progress. So what do I need to do? So I asked them, this is a yes or no answer. You don't have to tell me anything. I just want to know yes or no. How many times do you come to a session thinking about what you want to say, but you don't say it because you're worried about what your partner is going to think? So they're like, all the time. Both of them. So I'm like, okay. So what I did with them in particular is I told them, okay, I want you to go home and between now and the next time I see you, keep a list of the thing. And does that happen during the week? Oh yeah. Are there a lot of things you're thinking of that you're not sharing with your partner? Oh yeah, all the time. So I want you to keep a list, and I tell them to do the same thing with you know, a list of the things you would have wanted to say that you didn't and what you did instead.
Oh, great.
What did you want to have said that you didn't, and what did you do instead? And then I say, I want you to pick the easiest one, rank them on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, rank them by difficulty. So what I'm actually essentially instructing them not to pick the one about, I want to have sex, but I didn't tell you because I thought you wouldn't want to. I wouldn't have them pick that one. I have them pick one about, you know, like what my other couple said, menial things. And so something about, okay, what I don't know. I'm blocked today with the examples.
I think the example I'm thinking of is that last module or the one before that where the wife came saying about the use of the phone and she's trying to connect with him.
That one, that's a great example. That was module 3. Yeah, that's what I did with them. This is not the couple I was thinking of because the couple that you heard is a couple that stopped because the initiations didn't go well. So that's why I wasn't giving you that example, but that is a great example. That's exactly what I did with them too. So but back to the couple I'm thinking of, the severely conflict avoidant, both of them, severely undifferentiated, severely conflict avoidant. I told him to pick one that was a small issue that will give them enough anxiety to feel like they were doing something difficult, but not so much anxiety that they would be blocked and not be able to do it. So I gauge the anxiety about that. I tell that to a lot of couples in the beginning. If I push you too hard, you're going to quit on me. If I make you too anxious, but if I don't make you anxious enough, you're not going to make progress. So do I have your permission to make you anxious? So, so that's what I did. And so that's the preparation of the initiator, that you have them pick a small issue, and then you process it. How was that? What did you learn? How did you do? How hard was this for you? And then the listener, you know, usually the opposite happens. The listener will say, I'm so glad that I know what's on your mind. I'm so glad to hear you say that. I had no idea. I had no idea this bothered you. I had no idea this was a problem. So the severe conflict avoidant feels some relief. If you don't think you're going to get that reaction, then don't make them do it. But so in preparation of the listener, just to make sure that is going to happen, I say, you know, what do you think you're going to do if you hear her saying something, whatever? Do you think you know what she's going to be talking about? And he's like, I have no idea. Whereas the other ones will say, yeah, I've heard that a million times. So, you know, this one will say, I have no idea what she has in mind. So how would you react if you were surprised to hear something? I would love to know what she's thinking. I never hear what she's thinking. She never tells me what's on her mind. So that's the, if you get that kind, then that's easier. And then you process it. And then you move on to harder things. You know, things that are a little riskier, that are a little more involved, more emotionally vulnerable, etc.
So is this what you do all in one session, like the education for, like, let's say 15 minutes, and then they share the example? Or is it you talk about it and then you prepare them, and I mean, they prepare until the next session to bring you the issue or concern?
Either way, it just depends on what's going on and how much time we have, and
Right.
and how much education and preparation I think they need. You know, other people have done couples therapy before, so they don't need as much preparation, because almost every couples therapist has this tool, or a version of this tool. But so yeah, I do, and you know, let's say that I'm preparing them, you know, for 10-15 minutes, and then they go for it. I say, we may not have time to do the other one. We may only have time to do one. I try to have time to do both, but it's okay if we don't, because that's part of the learning process too. Like for the client that you heard in this session, she didn't get to initiate. Well, I want to say one more, and that's all right. I wanted her to tolerate the wait, you know, because you don't, in real life, you can't always do it simultaneously. So I didn't want to lose what I wanted to say, and I just did.
It'll come.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing about the what was it? Okay, yeah, it will have to come because I just lost it. If I don't write it down, I'd lose it. Oh, got it back. So, so the other thing you'll find with people, with many couples, is that they want to go into brainstorming and problem solving and fixing it immediately. So once they hear the concern of the initiator. Once the listener hears the concern of the initiator, a typical outcome is that they want to fix it. They don't want their partners to be uncomfortable. They don't like it that their partners have. So that's one reaction. Let me say it this way. One reaction is what you said, Sharon, they'll feel criticized. But the other possible reaction is that they'll want to get rid of the discomfort of the partner, that the listener will want to get rid of the discomfort of the partner and will want to fix it, change it, solve it,
Yeah.
brainstorm. And so, but either way, for whatever reason, I believe they want to go into problem solving too quickly. And so you heard me say that in the session. I said, once you, female partner, are able to initiate, next time, you will be able to go into problem solving, but not until then. Because when you initiate and you talk about your concerns and how you feel dismissed and what you want instead, and how you don't want to live the city for the winter, and you know what your concerns are and what your problems are with that and what you want, it's not until you each fully hear and understand the other that you are going to be ready to problem solve. So part of what I tell them is, and this couple is a perfect example of that, you know, because she got so upset, he went in his backhanded way, lying and not being honest and not telling her and all that. And I mean, for decades and decades and decades, they couldn't even go on a bike ride together because he couldn't say, I want to go on a 1 hour bike ride. And she couldn't say, I want to go on a 4 hour bike ride and then negotiate and find some kind of compromise that would be a win-win for both. They could not do that. They couldn't even do that. My first assignment was to get them to schedule a bike ride.
Wow.
That's how bad it was. And because the reaction she had to his wanting to leave the city for the winter was the same when he said, I don't want a 4 hour bike ride. So she said at some point in the session, you hear her say, yeah, I thought about when, you know, maybe we could rent something and maybe I could go back and forth. So that's already problem solved. That's problem solving, but I thought it was too early. And I don't remember if I told them that or not, but I'm telling you, when you see people doing that, before they get to initiate and hear each other out and fully understand and fully see what the other one wants, and they're clear on what they want and what the other one wants, which is not easy, I don't let them do brainstorming or problem solving. And once they learn this process, it's beautiful. Because when they learn it, they can problem solve sometimes immediately. And that's what happened in this case. I mean, they ended up doing it. Now, of course, it's COVID, so she had a little more flexibility with her job. We'll see what happens next winter. But anyway, so that's what I wanted to say. It is 11:20 almost, so I wanted to stop talking and ask you some more reactions, comments, or questions. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say that while we're talking about this, I'm thinking about a couple that I work with where the wife is very much one that needs to learn how to just how to think of how to prepare for what she wants to say and have 3 sentences so that her husband will actually listen, because once she gets started, it's way too much. But also he is one that is super conflict avoidant and won't say anything and needs to actually be prepared for how to speak something. But it feels like possibly his assumption is that she should know what he's thinking.
Oh,
And she thinks that she needs to tell him everything that she thinks and he thinks. And so it's 2 versions of very undifferentiated, like the opposite extremes of it.
yeah, it's very, very typical, very typical. So again, no, so this is leading me, what you're saying is leading me to think that a big part of the work of couples therapy is to figure out what's on each of their sidewalks and what they each need to do differently. And you you know, as you get to know your clients, you'll be able to help them figure out what they need to do differently. And in this case, she would have to agree that the goal is for her to get more organized so that he can tolerate what she says and be heard, and that she has a role to play in being heard. She would have to want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have to spell it out.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're working on with you here is on this. Do you agree? Do you want to do that? Is that, and sometimes you do that in an individual session, and sometimes you do that in a joint session, depending.
Mm-hmm.
But that has to be very clear what it is you're working on, and then you ask her to practice it and to figure out if she can do it on her own. And I don't let them do it on their own. I try to tell them to do it in session a few times before I send them to do it on their own. Some of them they want to do, they like it so much, they want to do it on their own. They get into a lot of trouble. So, and then others do it on their own and they love it and they do great. So it's hard to know.
Mm-hmm.
And then for him, he would have to be convinced. Again, this is the motivation part. This is the individual goal setting part. This is the, you know, what are you working with each of them on? He would have to buy into the idea that a good way for him to make progress individually is for him to get more used to thinking about what he wants to say and being able to say it.
And being able to trust that she will follow the listener rules.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. That's right. That's a big one. That's a big one. Very often. And so what I do with that is I tell her, if she's the one, I mean, this is what I did with this couple that we just heard. And in other sessions, I've said to her, you say you want him to be more honest. You say you want him to tell you what he wants. You say you want him to not go in a backhanded, passive-aggressive way. They call it the, what word do they use? They use a word. They don't use backhanded, they use, I don't remember. Anyway, and so I say to her, you say all that, but then when he does tell you what he wants, you don't like it. You feel dismissed, you don't respond well. So what do you want to do about that? So that's the work, right? With each of them, a scaffolding of development and a pushing forward. When you know what it is they each have to do. And when they agree, I mean, that's the main thing. Do they agree with you?
Yeah.
So when I write the summary of this meeting, I'm going to say that we talked a lot about the preparation of the initiator and the listener. Anything else I could say about what we did today? Just commenting on the case, right?
Yeah, and then just how you you explained the difference between how you approach it with a conflict avoidant versus someone who's
Right.
I forgot what the term was for the other type.
High conflict.
High conflict, okay.
Okay. And yeah, good call.
And also, I think it was important that the balance between knowing, you know, if you're doing interpersonal or intrapsychic, or if you need to push forward, or pause and go with feelings, or knowing where you want to take someone.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you. I want to reiterate some dates. I mentioned that the module 5 is going to be released on January 15th. The module 5 Zoom call will be February 5th at 11 a.m. The module 5 office hour will be on February 10th at 6 p.m. And the module 4 office hour will be next week on January 13th at 5 p.m. Central Time. So these are all Central Times. Okay, it sounds like we're
Thank you.
done.
Right?
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank
Yes,
you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.